Her billionaire husband left her while she gave birth to their daughter, saying, "I can't stand you anymore." 15 years later, at a Christmas party, a mysterious man walked in, crying with a truth that changed everything. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Your own family channel. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a light so gentle it heals, yet so powerful it lifts her above every storm. May your hearts stay soft even after carrying battles no one sees, and may your spirits rise stronger each morning, crowned with dignity that no voice, no wound, no hardship can ever take away. I pray your homes become places where peace walks freely, where laughter replaces every tear, and where your worth is honored the way God intended, without limits, without conditions, without question. May every step you take be guided by blessings that chase away pain, open new doors, and fill your days with joy that lasts. You are the breath of compassion, the strength behind generations, the love that never stops giving. And today, from the deepest part of my heart, I ask God to keep lifting you, protecting you, and surrounding you with endless grace. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Some women break during childbirth. Frida Bussi broke the man who tried to break her. The contractions hit like ocean waves, each one dragging Frida deeper into pain she'd never imagined possible. 4 minutes apart now. The hospital room at Mount Sinai smelled like antiseptic and fear, the monitors beeping steadily as nurses moved through hallways filled with the sounds of new life entering the world. But in room 347, Frida felt like she was dying alone. "Breathe through it, baby," Jamie Boland said from the chair beside her bed, but his eyes were fixed on his phone screen, not her face. The blue light illuminated his features, making him look like a stranger she'd never really known. Frida gripped the metal bedrail as another contraction tore through her body. 28 years old, and this was supposed to be the most beautiful moment of her life. 3 years with Jamie. 3 years of penthouses overlooking Central Park and charity galas where she wore borrowed diamonds. 3 years of believing that love could bridge any gap, even the one between a black woman from Georgia who grew up in a trailer park and a white billionaire whose family name appeared on buildings across Manhattan. "Jamie," she gasped, "it's getting worse. I think the baby's coming soon." He glanced up briefly, his jaw tightening at whatever message had just appeared on his screen. Another notification chimed. Then another. His thumb moved across the screen, responding to someone who clearly mattered more than the woman bringing his child into the world. "I need to take this call," he said, already standing, already moving toward the door. "Now?" Frida's voice cracked. "Jamie, please, I'm scared. The baby's coming and I need you here." He stepped into the hallway without answering. Through the partially open door, Frida heard fragments of his conversation, a woman's voice on the other end, high-pitched and desperate. Carolyn, his ex-fiancée. The one Jamie claimed meant nothing anymore. The contraction peaked and Frida screamed, a sound that came from somewhere primal and ancient. Her vision went white at the edges. She couldn't breathe through it this time, couldn't remember the breathing exercises from the classes she'd attended alone, because Jamie was always too busy. A nurse rushed in, her scrubs decorated with cartoon stalks. She checked the monitors, her expression shifting from routine to concerned. "We need Dr. Martinez," she called to someone in the hallway. "She's at 8 centimeters and progressing fast." Jamie appeared in the doorway, his phone still clutched in his hand. His face was pale. "Carolyn's father had a heart attack," he said. "He's at Presbyterian Hospital. She's there alone. She needs me." Frida couldn't speak through the pain radiating through every nerve. The nurse was saying something about getting her to delivery soon, about the baby's heart rate accelerating. Jamie stood there, frozen, one expensive Italian shoe in the room, one already pointed toward the exit. "I'll come back," he said, "after I check on her. You understand, right? Her father's dying." Frida found her voice between gasps. "Go, be with her. Come back when you can." But Jamie didn't move toward her for a goodbye kiss, didn't squeeze her hand one last time. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the contraction started, and Frida saw something in his expression that made her blood freeze. Disgust. Pure, undisguised disgust. "I can't stand you anymore," he said, his voice quiet but clear enough to cut through the monitor's beeping. The words hung in the air like smoke. The nurse with the cartoon stalks froze mid-motion. Frida's monitor continued its steady rhythm, the only sound in the suddenly silent room. "What?" Frida whispered. Jamie's hands clenched into fists. "The sounds you're making, the way you look right now, the sweating and the screaming and the—" He gestured vaguely at her body with barely concealed revulsion. "I can't do this. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. This is disgusting. You're disgusting." Another contraction hit before Frida could respond, and she screamed again, her body betraying her desperate need for dignity. When she could open her eyes again, when she could breathe past the pain, Jamie was gone. Just gone. The doorway empty, the hallway silent, except for the sound of his expensive shoes on the linoleum floor, getting farther away with each step until she couldn't hear them anymore. "Ma'am, we need to get you to delivery now," the nurse said gently. Her name tag read Patricia, and her eyes held a pity that made Frida want to die. "Baby's coming whether we're ready or not." They wheeled Frida down bright corridors, past other laboring mothers with partners holding their hands and filming the journey on phones, past families waiting in lobbies holding balloons and flowers and joy. Frida had no one. Patricia held her hand during the next contraction, and Frida gripped it like a lifeline. In the delivery room, Dr. Martinez positioned herself between Frida's legs. "You're doing great, Frida," she said. "Just a few more pushes, and you'll meet your baby girl." "Is he coming back?" Frida asked between sobs. "Did someone call him? Did someone tell him the baby's almost here?" The nurses exchanged glances. Patricia squeezed Frida's hand tighter. "Focus on your baby, sweetheart. That's what matters now. She needs you to be strong." Frida pushed. She pushed through pain that felt like her body was splitting in half. She pushed through tears that blurred her vision and made the bright surgical lights look like stars. She pushed through the realization that the man she loved had walked out on her during the most vulnerable moment of her life because he found her disgusting. At 11:47 at night, Sienna Bussey entered the world screaming, her tiny fists raised like a fighter. Dr. Martinez placed the baby on Frida's chest, and for one perfect moment, nothing else existed. Not Jamie's cruelty, not the uncertain future, just this perfect creature with Jamie's green eyes and Frida's brown skin, a beautiful combination that made Frida's heart ache with love so fierce it felt like drowning. "She's perfect," Patricia whispered, tears streaming down her own face. "Look at her, Mama. She's absolutely perfect." Sienna's tiny hand wrapped around Frida's finger with surprising strength, and something inside Frida shifted, hardened, transformed into something Jamie Boland would never understand. This baby didn't ask to be born into abandonment. This baby deserved everything, and Frida was going to make damn sure she got it. In the recovery room, Frida held Sienna and stared at the empty chair where Jamie should have been sitting. The clock ticked past midnight, past 1 in the morning, past 2. The hospital grew quiet, except for the occasional cry of a newborn down the hall. He wasn't coming back. Frida knew it in her bones, knew it in the way her milk was starting to come in, and her body was already adapting to motherhood, while his was walking further and further away. Patricia came back during her rounds, bringing water and crackers, helping Frida try to breastfeed for the first time. She showed her how to change a diaper on Sienna's impossibly small body, how to swaddle her tight so she felt safe. "You're going to be just fine," Patricia said, but her voice held doubt. At sunrise, a hospital aide knocked on the door, young kid with headphones around his neck. "Delivery for Frida Bussey." Frida's heart leapt despite everything. He'd sent flowers, an apology. But the aide handed her a manila envelope, not flowers. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note on Jamie's personal stationery. The note was brief. "This is generous. Don't contact me about the child. We're done. J. Frida read it 3 times. Then she tore the check into tiny pieces with shaking hands and let them fall like snow onto the hospital blanket. Sienna slept peacefully in her plastic bassinet, unaware that her father had just valued her entire existence at a dollar amount he considered generous. Patricia came in to check vitals and saw the torn check scattered across the bed. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I don't want his money," Frida said. Her voice sounded different now, harder, sharper, like something essential had calcified inside her chest. "I don't want anything from him. Not his money, not his name, nothing." She kept the note, though, folded it carefully and tucked it into the baby bag the hospital had given her. One day, she thought, one day she would frame it, not as a reminder of her pain, but as a reminder of the moment she decided that Jamie Boland's rejection would be the fuel for her transformation into something he could never touch, never taint, never claim any part of. That night, while Sienna slept in the plastic hospital bassinet with her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, Frida made a vow. She whispered it out loud so the universe would hear. "I will build something so magnificent that you will spend the rest of your miserable life choking on regret. I will become so powerful that your name will be a footnote in my story, a warning about what happens when weak men abandon strong women. And our daughter will never, ever know that you were too much of a coward to love her." Sienna stirred and made a small sound, the little grunts that newborns make. Frida picked her up, held her close against her chest, and for the first time since Jamie walked out of that delivery room, she smiled. "It's just you and me now, baby girl," she whispered against Sienna's soft hair that smelled like hope and new beginnings. "And we're going to be extraordinary." Chapter 2. Rock Bottom Has a Basement. They say you can't fall further than rock bottom. They've never been a black single mother in New York City with $67 to her name. 3 months after Sienna's birth, Frida stood on a Harlem sidewalk in August heat, watching 2 men in coveralls padlock her apartment door. Everything she owned sat in plastic garbage bags at her feet, the kind of cheap bags that rip if you look at them wrong. The super, a man named Lou, who'd always been friendly before, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I got orders," he said, his Brooklyn accent thick with embarrassment. "Rent's 4 months behind. Owner says you gotta go. Nothing personal." 4 months? Frida shifted Sienna's weight in her arms. The baby was getting heavy, growing despite everything, thriving on breast milk and the stubborn determination Frida fed her along with it. But Jamie was paying it directly. He promised he'd keep paying until I got on my feet. Lou shrugged and looked at his clipboard, like it held answers he couldn't give. "Ain't been no payments since the baby was born, miss. I'm sorry. Really, I am." The timeline hit Frida like a physical blow. He'd stopped paying the moment he left the hospital, while she was learning to breastfeed and recover from delivery, while she was falling in love with their daughter. He'd been systematically erasing her from his life with the same efficiency he applied to hostile corporate takeovers. A neighbor Frida barely knew, an older Dominican woman named Luz, came out of her apartment. She took one look at the scene and crossed herself. "Mija, you got somewhere to go?" Frida's throat tightened. Pride wanted her to say yes, to pretend she had family or friends or options. But Sienna made a sound in her arms, a little coo of hunger, and pride suddenly seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. "No." "The shelter on Brook Avenue," Luce said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "They take women with babies. My cousin stayed there last year. It's not great, but it's safe." She pressed a folded $20 bill into Frida's hand. "God bless you, baby. God bless that beautiful girl." The shelter looked exactly like every news story about poverty Frida had ever seen, and quickly changed the channel on, a former elementary school building with barred windows and a metal detector at the entrance. Women lined up outside despite the heat, some with children clinging to their legs, some visibly pregnant, all wearing the same expression of exhausted defeat that Frida now understood from the inside. She joined the line, becoming one of them. The intake worker was a tired white woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen everything twice. She didn't look up from her paperwork. Name: Frida Bussey. Age of minor child: 3 months. Her name is Sienna. Father's information for child support purposes? Frida hesitated, thinking about the torn check, about the note that said, "Don't contact me. Not available." Now the woman looked up. He doesn't know about the baby or he won't pay. He knows. He left us. The woman's expression softened slightly. Welcome to the club, honey. You're in room 6B. 6 women per room, 1 bathroom. Curfew is 10 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Kitchen closes at 8. You miss dinner, you don't eat. Any problems, you see me or Officer Rodriguez. How long can I stay? The woman almost smiled, but it came out sad. Technically 30 days. Reality, however long it takes. Some women are here for years. She handed Frida a key attached to a large plastic tag. Don't lose this. Replacements cost $50, and trust me, you don't have $50. Room 6B was on the 3rd floor. No elevator. Frida climbed the stairs with Sienna in one arm and 2 trash bags in the other, stopping twice to catch her breath while other residents squeezed past. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner, failing to mask the scent of too many desperate lives. Inside the room, 5 women looked up from their bunks. A young Latina girl, maybe 19, with twins sleeping in a donated crib. An older black woman reading a worn Bible. A white woman with a fading black eye who immediately turned to face the wall. 2 others who barely acknowledged Frida's existence. Bottom bunk by the window is yours, the older woman with the Bible said. Her voice was warm, despite everything. I'm Ruth. Been here 2 years. Welcome to paradise. Frida set down her bags and placed Sienna on the thin mattress. The baby immediately started crying, her wails echoing off concrete walls. She hungry? Ruth asked, closing her Bible. She's always hungry. Frida sat down and lifted her shirt to nurse, too tired for modesty. The other women politely looked away, giving what privacy they could in a room with no privacy. That first night, Sienna cried until 3 in the morning. The room was too hot, the single window offering no relief. Frida walked her back and forth in the tiny space between bunks, whispering apologies she didn't know how to keep. The young mother with twins finally snapped. Can you please shut that baby up? Some of us need to sleep. I'm trying, Frida said, rocking Sienna desperately, tears streaming down her own face now. She won't stop. Ruth got out of her bunk with slow movements. Without asking permission, she took Sienna and started humming something low and rhythmic. Within minutes, the baby quieted. How did you do that? Frida whispered. Raised 6 of my own before my husband died and the bank took everything. Ruth handed Sienna back gently. First baby? Yes. Father really gone? Walked out during labor, called me disgusting. Ruth nodded like she'd heard this story before. Then you're gonna have to be twice as strong as any man would need to be. This city don't care about women like us, but you got something they can't take. What's that? Motivation. When you got a baby depending on you, you'll survive things that would kill other people. Remember that when it gets hard. The next morning, Frida left Sienna with Ruth and went looking for work. She had no recent resume, no references Jamie would give, no college degree. Just desperation that made her willing to do anything legal. The diner on Lenox Avenue had a help wanted sign in the window. Inside, the smell of bacon grease and coffee hung heavy. The manager was a man named Pete with suspicious eyes. He looked Frida up and down like he was evaluating livestock. You ever waitressed before? No, but I'm a fast learner. You got a baby at home? Frida knew the wrong answer would cost her the job. Yes. Who's watching it? A friend. Pete sighed. Look, I'll be straight with you. I need someone reliable, not someone who's going to call out every time the baby sneezes. You desperate enough to show up every day? The question should have offended her. Instead, it felt like honesty. Yes. Minimum wage plus tips. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. 6 days a week. You're late once, you're gone. She started the next day. The work was brutal. 8 hours on her feet, taking orders from people who didn't say please or thank you. Her first week, she made $78 in tips. A customer left his business card with his phone number, whispering he could help her out financially if she was friendly. Frida tore the card in half and dropped it in his coffee. Pete saw the whole thing. That's gonna cost you tips. Rich guys like that tip big. I don't care. He studied her. Good. Last girl I had, she took the money. Ended up worse off than when she started. In the afternoons, Frida cleaned offices in Midtown. 3 hours scrubbing toilets for people who worked in glass towers and never looked at the woman making their workspace presentable. One day, in a recycling bin outside a venture capital firm, she found a business proposal for a luxury home goods company. Someone had written, "Rejected, margins too thin" across the front, but Frida looked at the numbers and saw something different. Rich people paid premium prices for exclusivity. She took the proposal home and read it until she had it memorized. At night, after her third job doing data entry in the shelter's computer room, after Sienna was finally asleep, Frida walked to the public library. She checked out business books and read about profit margins, supply chains, brand positioning. She took notes on napkins from the diner because she couldn't afford notebooks. Ruth noticed one night. "What you studying for?" "I'm going to start a business." "What kind?" "Luxury linens, high-end home goods, things rich people will pay anything for." "You got money to start a business?" "Not yet, but I will." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "I worked in textile manufacturing for 30 years before everything fell apart. I know fabrics. I know production. I know the whole damn industry." She paused. "You want a partner?" Frida looked at this woman who'd lost everything and somehow still had hope. "Why would you want to partner with me? I have nothing." Ruth smiled for the first time since Frida had met her. "That's exactly why. People with nothing have everything to fight for, and I've got knowledge worth more than money. Together, we might actually build something that matters." Chapter 3. The Foundation. Stone's empires aren't built with money. They're built with the hours everyone else is sleeping. 6 months after moving into the shelter, Frida had saved $1,100. Every tip, every extra shift, every dollar she could squeeze from 3 jobs went into a coffee can hidden under her bunk. She ate 1 meal daily so Sienna could have formula when Frida's milk ran dry from exhaustion and stress. Other shelter mothers watched Sienna during her shifts, creating a community of women who understood that survival required cooperation. Ruth kept her promise. She taught Frida everything about textiles during the quiet hours when other residents were watching television or sleeping. Thread counts, fabric weights, the difference between Egyptian cotton and regular, how to spot quality with touch alone, how to fake it when you couldn't afford the real thing yet. "The rich don't actually know quality," Ruth explained one night, her weathered hands holding fabric samples she'd kept from her old factory job. "They know brand names, they know price tags. Give them something expensive enough and exclusive enough, they'll convince themselves it's the best they've ever had." Frida absorbed every word like scripture she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. They started small. Frida used her saved money to buy fabric remnants from the garment district. Beautiful pieces that designers had discarded, perfect except for minor flaws that Ruth taught her to hide with strategic cutting. Ruth sewed on a machine she'd kept in storage, the only possession from her old life she hadn't sold, her gnarled fingers still moving with practiced precision despite the arthritis that made every stitch painful. Their first product was a set of pillowcases, midnight blue with gold embroidery in African-inspired patterns that told stories of resilience and transformation. The stitching was perfect, museum-quality work that Ruth created while Frida sketched new designs and Sienna played on a blanket beside them. "What do we call it?" Ruth asked, holding up the finished product. Frida thought about her trailer park childhood, about the way Jamie had looked at her in that delivery room, about every person who'd ever made her feel less than human. Maison Noire, Black House, because we're building our kingdom from the darkness they tried to bury us in. They set up at a weekend flea market in Soho, a card table borrowed from the shelter's common room. Frida wore her best outfit, a dress she'd owned since before Jamie, and held Sienna on her hip. The baby drew attention, her green eyes and brown skin a beautiful combination that made people stop. Hand-crafted luxury linens with African heritage patterns, Frida would say to anyone who paused. Each piece tells a story of resilience and rebirth. Most people walked past without stopping, but a woman in her 60s, wearing diamonds that could have paid rent for a year, stopped at their table. She picked up a pillowcase and examined the stitching with educated eyes that had seen quality before. "Who made this?" "I designed it," Frida said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My partner Ruth sewed it. The quality is exceptional. Where did you train?" "Life taught me everything I needed to know." The woman smiled at that answer. "How much?" Frida's heart pounded. She and Ruth had debated pricing for hours. Too low and they'd be dismissed as cheap. Too high and no one would buy. $120 for the set. The woman didn't blink. "I'll take 3 sets. Do you have a card?" Frida didn't. She scribbled the shelter's phone number on a piece of paper torn from her notebook. "We can make custom orders too. Any color, any pattern you want." The woman, whose name was Helen, became their first real customer. She told her friends at her book club. They told their friends. Within a month, Frida and Ruth were taking orders faster than they could fill them, working until their fingers bled and their eyes burned, building something from nothing with nothing but determination. But success brought problems. The shelter's common room wasn't suitable for production. Ruth's old sewing machine kept breaking down. They needed real space, professional equipment, capital to scale. Frida went to 3 banks, asking for a small business loan. All 3 turned her down the moment they saw her address listed as a homeless shelter. The loan officers didn't even pretend to consider her application. One told her directly, "Come back when you have collateral and a real address." The 4th bank was different. The loan officer was a black woman named Diane who actually read Frida's business plan instead of just scanning for red flags. "You're asking for $8,000 with no collateral, no credit history, and you live in a shelter." "Yes." "Why should I approve this?" Frida opened the folder she'd prepared and rewritten a dozen times. Inside were photos of their products, testimonials from customers, a detailed business plan with revenue projections based on their current order backlog, and a mission statement about creating ethical luxury that empowered women. "Because I'm going to build something bigger than anything you've ever financed," Frida said, looking Diane directly in the eyes. "And when I'm on magazine covers and giving speeches about how I started with nothing, I'm going to remember that you were the one person who believed in me when believing was a risk." Diane studied the folder for a long time. Then she studied Frida's face, reading determination in every line. "I'm not supposed to do this. If you default, it's my career. I won't default. I'd starve before I missed a payment." Diane pulled out an application. "Fill this out. I'm not promising anything." 2 weeks later, Frida got a call at the diner. Pete handed her the phone with a strange expression. It was Diane. The loan was approved. $8,000 at a brutal interest rate, but it was a door opening. Frida hung up the phone and cried right there behind the counter while Pete pretended not to notice. She and Ruth rented a tiny space in Brooklyn, barely bigger than a closet, but it was theirs. They bought an industrial sewing machine, fabric in bulk, supplies that would let them scale production. Maison Noire had its first real workshop. The day they moved in, Ruth cried for the first time since Frida had known her. "I never thought I'd have this again." "Have what?" "Hope, purpose, a reason to wake up that isn't just survival." Meanwhile, across the city in a world Frida had been exiled from, Jamie Boland's face appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine. The article detailed his latest acquisition, his growing empire, his marriage to Carolyn that the society pages called a fairy tale union. Frida bought the magazine with money she should have spent on groceries, cut out his photo, and taped it to the wall of their workshop. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Why keep a picture of him? Motivation, Frida said. She wrote across his face in red marker, "You had everything and walked away. Watch what I do with nothing." That night, working late while Sienna slept in a portable crib nearby, Frida and Ruth filled their largest order yet. 50 pillowcase sets for a boutique hotel in Tribeca, whose owner had found them through word of mouth and didn't care about their backstory, only about quality and uniqueness. As Frida packaged the last set, she realized something that felt like freedom. She hadn't thought about Jamie in days, not with anger or pain or longing. She'd been too busy building to look backward. Ruth noticed her smile. "What?" "I think we're going to make it." "Of course we are," Ruth said, her fingers still moving steadily across fabric. "Women like us don't have the luxury of failure. We either build or we die. And baby, we're building." Chapter 4. The climb gets steeper. Success makes you visible, and visibility makes you a target. 18 months after Sienna's birth, Maison Noire had grown beyond anything Frida had imagined in those early days at the shelter. They'd moved from the tiny Brooklyn space into a proper workshop in Long Island City with room for 3 sewing machines and 2 employees. Frida had hired them both from the shelter, women Ruth had trained personally, paying them triple minimum wage because she remembered what poverty felt like. Frida had moved out of the shelter into a studio apartment in Harlem. Small, barely big enough for her and Sienna, but it was theirs. The first morning waking up there, Frida had cried looking at the crib she'd bought new, not donated, not borrowed. New. A crib that belonged to them that nobody could take away. But growth brought enemies she hadn't anticipated. The textile trade show at the Javits Center was supposed to be Maison Noire's big break. Frida had saved for months to afford a booth, had prepared samples of their entire product line, had practiced her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep without hesitation. She set up her booth early, arranging products with the eye for detail Ruth had taught her. Sienna sat in a stroller nearby, playing with fabric swatches. At 18 months old, she was beautiful and calm, drawing smiles from people passing by who couldn't resist a baby's charm. 3 men approached midday, distributors from a major home goods chain, their name tags proclaimed in bold letters. They examined Frida's products with the kind of scrutiny that felt less like evaluation and more like violation. The oldest one, maybe 50, with a thick Long Island accent, picked up a duvet cover. "Pretty work," he said, his tone suggesting surprise. "Where's it manufactured?" "Right here in New York, Queens." He raised an eyebrow like she'd just claimed the moon was made of cheese. "Really? Not China? Not some sweatshop in Bangladesh?" "Really. Every stitch done by hand in my workshop by women I pay fairly." The second man, younger with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than Frida's monthly rent, looked at her price sheet and laughed. "These prices are ambitious for a company nobody's heard of. You think you're some luxury brand?" "The quality speaks for itself," Frida said calmly, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. The third man hadn't said anything yet. Now he laughed, the sound cruel and dismissive, designed to humiliate. "Ambitious, that's one word for it." He looked at his colleagues like they were sharing a private joke. "Another word is delusional. You know what I think? I think this is some welfare queen trying to play businesswoman. Probably got a government grant to be here, right? Some diversity program quota they had to fill?" Frida's hands clenched at her sides, but her face remained calm. Around them, people at neighboring booths had stopped pretending not to listen. "I built this company from savings, every dollar earned through work." "Sure you did, sweetheart." The man leaned against her table like he owned it. "Let me guess. You slept with someone to get this booth? That's usually how girls like you get ahead in this industry." The anger that flooded Frida's body was physical, hot and consuming and righteous. But she'd learned something crucial in those shelter months, something that had kept her alive and sane. Anger expressed was power given away. She looked at the man with perfect calm, with the kind of composure that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "I built this business from a homeless shelter while raising my daughter alone," she said, her voice steady and clear enough to carry to every neighboring booth. "I worked 90-hour weeks. I earned every inch of this table through blood and determination, and men like you, who mistake confidence for sexuality because you can't imagine a woman succeeding without a man's help, are exactly why I'll enjoy watching you become irrelevant in an industry that's finally learning to value ethics over exploitation." The first man had the grace to look uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Let's go," he muttered to his friends. But the cruel one wasn't finished. He wanted the last word, needed it like oxygen. "Enjoy your little booth, sweetheart. You'll be out of business in 6 months. Companies like yours don't last." They left. Frida stood there shaking, trying not to cry in front of the crowd that had gathered. Then something unexpected happened. The woman from the booth next to hers, owner of an established home fragrance company, started clapping. Then others joined. Quiet at first, uncertain if solidarity was allowed in a competitive space, then louder. An older woman in expensive clothing approached Frida's table with purpose in her stride. "I heard that entire exchange," she said. "I'm Helen Wu, head buyer for Nordstrom Home. I'd like to discuss carrying your line in our stores, and I'd like to know the name of that man so I can make sure my company never does business with his." The day that should have ended in defeat became Frida's biggest breakthrough. But it came with a cost she didn't anticipate, a price that would be paid in fear. That night, Frida returned to her apartment exhausted but victorious. She'd gotten orders from 3 major retailers, including Nordstrom, but when she tried to unlock her door, she found it already open. Inside, someone had trashed her small apartment. Drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, her few possessions scattered across the floor like garbage. Nothing was stolen. It was just destruction for destruction's sake, a message written in violence and malice. On her bathroom mirror, written in lipstick that looked like blood in the dim light, "Go back where you came from." Frida called the police. They came, took a report, told her there wasn't much they could do without evidence or witnesses. The officer, a young white guy who barely looked at her while taking notes, suggested maybe it was random vandalism. It wasn't random. Frida knew that. Success made enemies, especially for women who weren't supposed to succeed, for black women who dared to claim space in industries built on exclusion. She cleaned up the apartment while Sienna slept in her car seat, crying quietly so she wouldn't wake her daughter. By sunrise, everything was back in order. The message washed away, but the fear remained, living in her chest like a second heartbeat. Ruth found out the next day and came to the apartment immediately. "You need to file something, a restraining order, something." "Against who?" "I don't know who did it. Could be anyone." "Then you need security, cameras, someone watching your back." Frida couldn't afford security guards, but she could afford cameras. She installed them herself, cheap ones from a hardware store, but visible enough to deter, and she kept pushing forward because stopping meant they won, and winning was the only option she had left. The Nordstrom order changed everything. Suddenly, Maison Noire wasn't just a small company anymore. They were legitimate, real, impossible to ignore. Frida hired 3 more employees, all single mothers she'd met at various shelters and community centers. She paid them triple minimum wage with benefits because she remembered what poverty felt like, how it ground you down until you forgot you were human. One afternoon, Ruth clutched her chest during their lunch break. Her face went grey. "Just heartburn," she insisted, her voice weak. Frida drove her to the emergency room anyway, ignoring Ruth's protests. The doctor said Ruth's heart was weak, that stress was killing her slowly, that she needed to slow down immediately. Ruth refused to listen. Insisted on returning to work the next day because the workshop was her life now, her purpose, her reason for existing beyond mere survival. "I'm not slowing down," Ruth told Frida in the hospital room, her hand gripping Frida's with surprising strength. "This company is my legacy too. Let me build it with you until I can't anymore." That week, a business magazine ran a small feature on Maison Noire. The article called Frida the ethical entrepreneur and detailed her journey from shelter to success in language that made it sound easier than it was. It was supposed to be good publicity, the kind that brought customers. Instead, the online comments section filled with poison. People questioning whether she'd really built the company herself, suggesting she was sleeping with investors or buyers, calling her a diversity hire, an affirmative action case, a fraud who didn't deserve success because she hadn't been born into the right circumstances. The racism was sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit, always present. Frida read every comment until Ruth found her crying at her desk, Sienna asleep in her arms, both of them exhausted from trying to prove their humanity to people who would never acknowledge it. "Don't read that garbage," Ruth said, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. "They think I didn't earn this, that it was given to me. Who cares what they think? You know the truth. I know the truth. Sienna will know the truth." Ruth sat down heavily, her hand still pressed to her chest. "Success threatens people who've never had to fight for anything. Let them be threatened. Let them choke on your success. Because, baby, you're just getting started." Chapter 5. The Inheritance. Ruth left her no money. She left her something far more valuable, a reason to win that transcended profit. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Frida was at the workshop reviewing fabric samples. Ruth had collapsed, her heart finally giving up the fight it had been losing for months. By the time Frida reached the hospital with Sienna crying in her arms, her partner, her friend, her second mother was already gone. The doctors said it was massive and instant, that Ruth didn't suffer. Frida suffered enough for both of them. The funeral was small, held at a community church in the Bronx that offered services to people who couldn't afford Manhattan prices. Just Frida, Sienna, who was now 2 years old and couldn't understand why Mama was crying so hard, and 5 women from the shelter who remembered Ruth as the kind lady who always shared her dinner even when she was hungry herself. No other family. Ruth had outlived them all, surviving everyone except the business she'd helped birth. The shelter's chaplain said generic words about God's plan and eternal rest that felt hollow and insufficient. Frida stood there numb, unable to process that the woman who'd taught her everything, who'd believed in her when belief was a radical act, was just gone, erased from the world like she'd never existed. After everyone left, Frida stayed at the grave with Sienna sleeping against her shoulder. "I don't know how to do this without you," she whispered to the fresh dirt. "You were supposed to see us make it. You were supposed to be there when we got too big to fail." But Ruth had known she was dying. She'd prepared for it with the same methodical attention to detail she'd applied to every stitch she'd ever sewn. The lawyer who handled Ruth's estate was a young woman named Keisha, who practiced in the Bronx and specialized in helping people who couldn't afford fancy Manhattan attorneys with leather chairs and mahogany desks. She called Frida a week after the funeral, her voice gentle but professional. "Ruth left a will. Can you come to my office?" Frida expected nothing. Ruth had lived in that shelter for 2 years by choice, even when she could have afforded to leave. What could she possibly have to leave behind? Keisha's office was above a bodega, small but tidy, decorated with photos of clients who'd won impossible cases. She pulled out a folder and smiled sadly, like she'd been given instructions to deliver a message from beyond the grave. Ruth was an interesting woman. Did you know she'd been saving every penny she earned from Maison Noire? I paid her a salary, but it wasn't much. It was enough for her. She lived at the shelter by choice these last months, even when she could have afforded an apartment. She was saving for something specific. Keisha slid papers across the desk. She invested $11,000 into Maison Noire without telling you, bought shares in the company. Those shares now belong to your daughter Sienna in a trust. Ruth set it up so the shares can't be touched until Sienna's 18, but all dividends go into an education fund. Frida couldn't breathe. The office walls seemed to close in. She did what? She believed in you, wanted to make sure Sienna's future was secure no matter what happened. Keisha pulled out another item from the folder, a thick notebook, pages worn and filled with Ruth's careful handwriting in blue ink. She also left you this. Frida opened the notebook with shaking hands. Inside was everything. 30 years of textile industry knowledge poured onto pages with diagrams and notes and wisdom. Supplier contacts with notes about who was honest and who would cheat you blind. Manufacturing shortcuts that didn't compromise quality. Pricing strategies that accounted for market psychology. Negotiation tactics that leveraged power without exploitation. Trade secrets from Ruth's decades in factories, knowledge that companies paid consultants millions to acquire. The last page was a letter written in Ruth's shaky handwriting, dated 2 weeks before she died. Frida, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't you dare stop building. Don't you dare let them win. You're the daughter I never had, and Sienna is the granddaughter I was blessed to know for too short a time. Take everything I taught you and multiply it. Make them all regret underestimating you. Show that sorry excuse for a man who left you what a real empire looks like. I love you both. Keep fighting. The world needs more women like you. Ruth. Frida sobbed in that small office above the bodega, while Sienna played with papers on the floor. Keisha handed her tissues and didn't rush her, understanding that some grief needed space to breathe before it could be packed away. When Frida could finally speak, she said, she knew she was dying. The heart condition was diagnosed 6 months ago. She chose not to tell you because she didn't want you to stop her from working. She said work gave her purpose, that watching you build gave her hope she thought she'd lost forever. That night, Frida sat in her apartment with Sienna, asleep beside her, and read every page of Ruth's notebook cover to cover. She read about fabric mills in North Carolina that still produced quality American-made textiles, about dye houses that could create custom colors nobody else had, about the art of building relationships with suppliers so you got priority treatment during shortages, about how to spot trends before they became mainstream, how to read market shifts in the behavior of luxury consumers. It was a blueprint for building an empire, written in the hand of someone who'd lost everything and helped Frida build from nothing. Frida spent the next 3 months implementing Ruth's contacts and strategies like a general following battle plans from a master tactician. She found a manufacturer in South Carolina who could produce their linens at scale without sacrificing quality. She negotiated better fabric prices by ordering in bulk, like Ruth's note suggested, leveraging volume for discounts. She expanded the product line based on market research Ruth had quietly been conducting, notebooks filled with observations about what wealthy women wanted but couldn't articulate. Revenue doubled, then tripled, then doubled again. But success brought new complications. Banks that had denied her loans suddenly wanted meetings, the same institutions that had dismissed her when she lived in a shelter. We'd love to discuss funding your expansion, they'd say, their smiles predatory now that she had something they wanted. Frida took meetings with all of them just for the satisfaction of watching their faces when she declined their offers. She'd learned to build without their help. She didn't need them now, didn't need their money or their validation or their approval. Instead, she took a loan from a community development bank that specialized in women-owned businesses. The interest rate was fair, the terms reasonable, and the loan officer was a woman who'd built her own business from nothing and understood what Frida was creating without needing explanations. One afternoon at a business networking event, a woman approached Frida with the kind of smile that promised trouble. White, 50s, expensively dressed in a way that screamed old money. "You're Frida Bussy, from Maison Noire?" "Yes. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Claire Walsh. We haven't met officially, but we have a mutual acquaintance, Jamie Boland." Frida's entire body went cold. The room suddenly felt too hot, too crowded, too small. "We're not acquainted anymore." Claire looked uncomfortable, realizing she'd stepped into something complicated. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry, I just assumed since you have a child together you must still be in contact. We don't have anything together. Excuse me." The woman left quickly, but the damage was done. Frida's hands shook for an hour afterward, adrenaline flooding her system like she'd been physically attacked. She'd successfully avoided Jamie's world for 2 years, building her company in spaces he'd never notice, creating success he'd never hear about. But Manhattan's elite circles were small, interconnected webs where everyone eventually crossed paths. That night, Sienna woke up from a nightmare, screaming for her mama. Frida held her, rocking her back to sleep in the chair by the window. "Mama's here, baby girl. Mama's always here. Nobody's ever going to hurt you because I'm never going to let them close enough." As Sienna's breathing evened out and sleep reclaimed her, Frida made a decision. She would keep building, keep growing until she was so successful that Jamie couldn't ignore her existence even if he tried. Until he saw her name in the same publications that featured him. Until he understood with crushing clarity exactly what he'd thrown away. She opened her laptop and found Jamie's Forbes article from 2 years ago, his face smiling from a world he'd been born into. His company was worth just over $1 billion. The article detailed his lavish lifestyle, his marriage to Carolyn that had supposedly healed his broken heart, his plans for expansion into foreign markets. Frida studied his face in the photo like an enemy general studying battlefield maps. He looked happy, successful, untouched by consequences, floating above accountability like wealth always did. She printed the article and added it to the wall in her office, where she kept her motivation. Beside it, she pinned Ruth's letter in a frame she'd bought specifically for this purpose. 2 paths. One man who'd inherited everything and squandered it through cruelty. One woman building from nothing with nothing but determination and the ghost of a friend who'd believed in her. "I'm coming for you, Jamie Boland," she whispered to the photo. "Not for revenge. For proof that you were never necessary, that everything I've built, I built despite you. Not because of you. You're irrelevant. Watch me prove it." Chapter 6. The Empire Rises. They thought she'd peaked. She'd barely started climbing. 5 years after Sienna's birth, Maison Noire was generating millions in annual revenue that kept climbing. Frida opened her first retail store in Manhattan's Soho district, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows and displays that made luxury feel attainable instead of exclusive. The store became an instant success, featured in design magazines and lifestyle blogs that called her approach revolutionary. But Frida's real innovation wasn't the products. It was how she built her team with intention instead of exploitation. She hired exclusively women, particularly single mothers and former shelter residents, who understood what it meant to fight for survival. Every employee earned triple minimum wage with full benefits and on-site childcare because Frida remembered what it felt like to choose between feeding your child and paying rent. While other companies fought unions and cut corners to maximize profit, Frida built loyalty through genuine care that went beyond corporate platitudes. "You're paying too much," her accountant warned during quarterly reviews. "Your profit margins would increase significantly if you paid market rate. You're leaving money on the table." "I don't build businesses to maximize profit," Frida said, her voice firm. "I build them to change lives. If I wanted to be rich and heartless, I would have stayed with Jamie Boland." The media noticed and couldn't decide if she was a saint or a fool. Articles appeared calling her the ethical entrepreneur and redefining luxury through compassion. Magazine editors requested interviews. Business schools wanted her to speak at conferences about sustainable capitalism and ethical supply chains. But visibility brought attacks from competitors who saw her success as a threat to their model. A competitor launched a website claiming Maison Noire used sweatshop labor overseas, complete with fabricated photos and fake testimonials. Completely false, easily disproven with documentation, but the damage was immediate and devastating. Sales dropped 30% in a week as customers fled, scared of being associated with exploitation. Frida fought back with the fury of someone who'd built everything from nothing. She released documentation of her workshop, interviews with employees who spoke on camera about their wages and working conditions, independent audits proving every product was ethically made. She didn't just defend herself, she went on the offensive, calling out the competitor publicly in press releases and threatening legal action for defamation and tortious interference. The competitor backed down within days, issuing a retraction that barely anyone read. But the experience taught Frida that success made you a target, especially when you were a black woman disrupting an industry controlled by old white money that protected itself viciously. One morning, Frida arrived at her store to find the window spray-painted with a slur that made her stomach turn. The glass was shattered, products stolen in a smash-and-grab that security footage showed took under 2 minutes. 3 men in masks, in and out, destroying in seconds what had taken years to build. The police came, filed a report, did nothing productive beyond creating paperwork. Frida had the window replaced within 24 hours, refusing to let them see her hurt. She didn't hide what happened. Instead, she posted about it on social media with a photo of the damage. They tried to break us. We're stronger for it. Hatred is fear wearing a mask. We choose love and keep building. Always. The post went viral in ways she hadn't anticipated. Customers rallied with orders and messages of support. Sales surged as people wanted to support a business that had been attacked. What was meant to destroy her made her stronger, more visible, more determined. Sienna was now 5 years old, enrolled in a decent public school in Harlem, where teachers praised her intelligence and composure. She was brilliant, curious, asking questions that showed early signs of her mother's strategic thinking. One day, her teacher pulled Frida aside after pickup, her expression uncomfortable. "Other parents are complaining that Sienna brags too much about you and your company." Frida raised an eyebrow. "Brags how?" "She talks constantly about how you're the boss, how you built everything yourself, how you're powerful and strong. Some parents feel it makes their children feel inadequate about their own families. So their solution is to make my daughter feel bad for being proud of her mother." The teacher shifted uncomfortably, caught between competing pressures. "I'm just letting you know what's being said in parent meetings." Frida looked at Sienna through the classroom window. Her daughter was helping a smaller child reach a book on a high shelf, naturally kind, despite being taught to be fierce. "My daughter will never apologize for celebrating strength. If other children feel inadequate, perhaps their parents should build something worth celebrating instead of tearing down a 5-year-old's pride in her mother." The teacher had no response to that. That night, Frida lay in bed with Sienna, reading her a bedtime story about a princess who saved herself because she'd learned that princes were optional and strength was forever. Halfway through, she paused. "Baby, your teacher said some parents think you brag too much about Mama." Sienna looked up with serious eyes that saw too much for her age. "Am I not supposed to be proud of you?" "You can be as proud as you want, but I want you to understand something important. Some people will always try to make you smaller because they feel small inside. Don't let them. But also, be kind. Show people through your actions what strong looks like, not just your words." "Like you do." Frida smiled and kissed her forehead. "Exactly like I do." A week later, a European luxury conglomerate approached Frida about acquiring Maison Noire. The offer was $150 million in cash, stock options, retention bonuses. Her lawyer urged her to take it with an urgency that bordered on desperation. "This is generational wealth," he said, spreadsheets showing exactly what she'd be walking away from. "You'd never have to work again. Sienna's future would be secure forever. Her children's children would be secure." Frida listened to the entire pitch in silence. Then she said no with a finality that allowed no negotiation. "Why?" her lawyer asked, genuinely confused by what he saw as irrationality. "Because I'm not building something to sell. I'm building something that outlives me. Something Sienna can inherit and grow. Something that proves a woman from a homeless shelter can build an empire that lasts generations. Money is temporary. Legacy is forever." The conglomerate increased their offer twice. Frida declined both times without hesitation. They couldn't understand why anyone would turn down that much money, why financial security wouldn't be enough to make her sell her life's work. But Frida understood something they didn't. She wasn't motivated by money or security or comfort. She was motivated by proving that she mattered, that she was powerful, that every person who'd underestimated her had been catastrophically wrong. That year, during the holidays, Frida took Sienna to a charity event benefiting homeless shelters across the city. They served food, donated supplies from Maison Noire, and Frida made sure to visit the shelter where she'd lived with Ruth, where everything had started. The current residents stared at her like she was a celebrity, a myth made flesh. Many recognized her from articles and interviews, her face now associated with impossible success. "You really lived here?" a young mother asked, holding a baby that could have been Sienna 5 years ago, desperation in her eyes. "Room 6B. That was my bunk by the window." "How did you do it? How did you get out and build all this?" Frida looked at this young woman who was exactly where she'd been, scared and desperate and trying to believe in a future that seemed impossible. She chose her words carefully because she knew they mattered, knew they could be the difference between giving up and trying one more day. "I decided that my daughter deserved better than my circumstances. Then I worked harder than I thought humanly possible. Then I found people who believed in me when nobody else would. Then I kept going when everything told me to stop. That's all. There's no secret formula, just refusing to quit when quitting would be easier." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I'm trying so hard." "I know you are. Keep trying. One day you'll come back here like I am, to prove to someone else that it's possible. And that's how we change the world, one woman at a time." On the drive home, Sienna asked a question that had been building for years. "Mama, were we really that poor once? We had nothing except each other. That's why we appreciate everything now, why we never take anything for granted." "Do you ever see my father?" The question caught Frida off guard, despite knowing it would come eventually. "No, baby. He's not part of our lives." "Does he know about you? About your company and everything you built?" "I don't know. Maybe. But it doesn't matter either way." But she was about to find out. That week, Architectural Digest magazine contacted her about a feature story. They wanted to photograph her store, her home, her and Sienna together living their lives. "The woman who built an empire from nothing" would be the headline on the cover. The photo shoot captured them cooking dinner together in their brownstone, laughing over burned pasta, being a family. Simple moments that represented everything Jamie had walked away from, everything he'd never know. The article published the following month, full spread, beautiful photos, and a quote from Frida that the interviewer had specifically asked about. When asked about Sienna's father, Frida simply smiles and says, "We don't discuss people who don't matter." In his Midtown office, Jamie Boland saw the magazine on his assistant's desk. He picked it up idly, then froze when he saw Frida's face on the cover, looking powerful and successful and completely untouchable. He read the article 3 times, unable to look away from the photo of a daughter he'd never met, who had his eyes and her mother's unbreakable strength. His hands shook as he set down the magazine. Everything was falling apart. His second wife had left him 6 months earlier for someone richer. His company was facing federal investigation for practices he'd inherited but continued, and the woman he'd called disgusting in a delivery room was on the cover of Architectural Digest, being celebrated as a visionary while he slowly self-destructed. He picked up his phone to call her, then put it down, realizing he had nothing to say that would matter. What would he even say? That he was sorry. Sorry didn't rebuild 5 years of absence. Sorry didn't make him a father. Sorry was just a word that changed nothing. Frida knew none of this because she was too busy planning her next expansion, a furniture line, a home fragrance collection, a foundation to help women escape poverty with job training and microloans. She was too busy building to look backward at ghosts that didn't deserve her attention. But the universe was about to force them into the same space, whether she was ready or not. And this time, there would be witnesses. Chapter 7. The daughter becomes the sword. Sienna Bussey learned 3 things from her mother. Dignity isn't negotiable, silence isn't weakness, and revenge is a dish that ages like wine until it's perfect. 10 years after her birth, Sienna was enrolled at Westmont Academy, Manhattan's most elite private school where tuition cost $60,000 annually. Frida paid in cash, up front, and watched the bursar's face carefully for any sign of surprise that she could afford it. There was none. Money erased prejudice, or at least made it less visible. But money didn't buy belonging in spaces built to exclude. Sienna was the only black student in her grade, and one of few whose mother hadn't inherited wealth through generations of accumulated privilege. The other students were children of hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, entertainment moguls whose faces appeared in tabloids. Their families had compounds in the Hamptons and apartments in Paris that sat empty most of the year. Sienna had a mother who worked constantly and a brownstone in Harlem that represented impossible success. The first week, girls surrounded her at lunch in a coordinated attack designed to establish hierarchy. The ringleader was Brittany, daughter of some real estate dynasty that built half of Manhattan on the backs of tenant exploitation. "Is it true your mom used to be homeless?" Brittany asked loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. Sienna looked at her calmly, showing none of the fear they expected. "Yes." "That's so sad. My mom said your mom trapped a rich guy with a baby, and he left her because she was obviously just after his money." Something in Sienna's expression must have changed, because Brittany stepped back slightly, instinct warning her she'd miscalculated. But Sienna didn't yell or cry or react the way they'd been taught. Girls from her background should react. She'd learned from her mother that composure was power and silence was strategy. "My mum built a company worth more than your dad's last development deal," Sienna said quietly, each word chosen with precision, "while living in a shelter, with a baby, alone. What has your mother built besides a reputation for spending your father's money on things she doesn't need?" Brittany's face went red with humiliation and rage. "You can't talk to me like that. Do you know who my family is? I know exactly who your family is. A name bought with other people's labor. My mother earned her name through work. There's a difference." The confrontation should have ended there, but Brittany's mother was exactly what Frida had expected. Entitled, indignant, furious that her daughter had been challenged. She called the school demanding Sienna be expelled for bullying and creating a hostile environment for other students. The headmaster, Dr. Reynolds, called both families in for a mediation meeting in his office, lined with photos of wealthy alumni. Frida arrived wearing a custom suit from Maison Noir's new clothing line, looking like she owned the building. Sienna sat beside her, calm and composed, her posture perfect. Across from them, Brittany and her mother, who was dripping in jewelry that cost more than some people's houses and wearing entitlement like armor she'd been born in. "Your daughter verbally attacked mine," Brittany's mother said, her voice sharp with outrage. "I won't have my child bullied by someone from her background." The pause before background was intentional, loaded with everything she couldn't say explicitly. Dr. Reynolds looked uncomfortable, caught between money and morality. "Mrs. Bussey, can you explain what happened from Sienna's perspective?" Sienna spoke before Frida could, her voice clear and unwavering. "Brittany said my mother trapped a rich man with a pregnancy, and that's why he left us. She said it in front of the entire cafeteria as a deliberate humiliation tactic. I responded by pointing out that my mother built a successful company alone, while Brittany's mother has built nothing except a shopping habit. Those are facts, not attacks." "You called my shopping habits an addiction," Brittany's mother shrieked, losing the composure that old money was supposed to guarantee. "I called them a shopping addiction," Sienna corrected with devastating calm. "There's a significant difference between the two statements." Frida fought not to smile. Her daughter was magnificent, everything she'd hoped she'd become. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat, searching for diplomatic ground. "I think both girls should apologize. and we can move forward productively. No, Frida said quietly, the single word carrying absolute authority. Everyone turned to look at her. My daughter will not apologize for defending herself against a classist attack designed to humiliate her for circumstances beyond her control. She will not apologize for being proud of her mother, and if this school values the hurt feelings of a bully over the dignity of a child being targeted for her economic background, then we'll leave immediately, and I'll make sure every media outlet knows exactly why. Mrs. Bussey, let's not be hasty, Dr. Reynolds said, panic creeping into his voice. I'm not being hasty. I'm being clear. Sienna stays without apology, or we leave, and you explain to your board why you lost a major donor over a child defending herself from bullying. They walked out together, heads high. In the car, Sienna asked, Am I expelled? No, baby. Dr. Reynolds will call tonight and apologize profusely, because this school needs my donations more than they need Brittany's mother's outrage. How do you always know what's going to happen? Because I understand power dynamics. Real power isn't money. It's knowing your value and never negotiating it away for anyone's comfort. Dr. Reynolds did call that night. He apologized. Brittany had been given detention for initiating the bullying. Sienna could return whenever she was ready, and he hoped this incident wouldn't affect the Bussey family's relationship with the school. But something shifted after that incident. Instead of trying to fit into spaces designed to exclude her, Sienna embraced being different. She started a business club at school, teaching other students about entrepreneurship and ethical business practices. She volunteered at the shelter where her mother had lived, serving meals to current residents and showing them that escape was possible. She became the student everyone knew, not because her mother had money, but because she had substance that money couldn't buy. One afternoon, the school invited Frida to speak at Career Day. She arrived with samples from Maison Noire and a presentation about building businesses that valued people over profit. The auditorium was packed. Frida stood at the podium and told her story without softening the edges, without making poverty sound noble or suffering sound romantic. She talked about the shelter, the 3 jobs, Ruth, the discrimination, the harassment, the systematic ways society tried to erase her. She talked about building something meaningful rather than just profitable, about measuring success in changed lives instead of quarterly reports. When she finished, half the audience gave her a standing ovation. The other half sat uncomfortably, parents who'd inherited their wealth and couldn't relate to earning anything beyond interest payments. After the event, several students approached Sienna with new respect. Your mom is amazing, one girl said. My dad just inherited his company from his dad. He didn't build anything himself. He just manages what someone else created. Sienna smiled. Building is harder, but it means more. That week, Architectural Digest hit newsstands with Frida on the cover, looking powerful and accomplished. The article spread through Westmont Academy like wildfire. Suddenly, every student knew who Sienna's mother was beyond vague awareness. Some were impressed, others were jealous. All of them understood that the Bussey family wasn't ordinary. Brittany cornered Sienna in the bathroom, making one last attempt to reassert dominance through cruelty. My mum says your mum's just a diversity hire in business magazines, says real entrepreneurs don't get featured for being ethical, they get featured for making money. She says your mum is just good at publicity. Sienna looked at her with something close to pity. Your mum's just jealous that the only magazine she'll ever be in is the society pages where they list her like furniture at a charity gala. My mother changed an entire industry's approach to labor practices. What has yours done besides marry rich and spend money she didn't earn? This time Brittany had no response. The truth was too devastating to argue with. That night, Frida and Sienna cooked dinner together in their brownstone kitchen, a tradition that no amount of success would change. Tonight, they were making pasta from scratch, Sienna's hands covered in flour while Frida rolled dough. Mama, the girls at school keep asking about my father. Frida's hands stilled. This conversation had been coming for years. What do you tell them? That I don't have one, that it's just us. Does that bother you? Sienna thought about it with the careful consideration she applied to everything. No. I just wonder sometimes what he's like. If he knows about you and everything you built. If he ever thinks about us." Frida sat down beside her daughter, flour dusting both of them. "Your father made a choice to leave when I needed him most. That choice tells you everything you need to know about him. Everything good in your life came from us choosing each other every single day, from deciding that family is what you build, not what you're born into. Do you hate him? I did once. Now I just don't think about him at all. Hate requires caring enough to feel something. I don't care enough to hate." But across town, in an office that used to represent power and success, Jamie Boland was thinking about them constantly, obsessively, destructively. The Architectural Digest article sat on his desk, pages worn from repeated reading. His daughter was 10 years old and didn't know he existed. His ex-girlfriend had built an empire and described him as someone who doesn't matter. His second marriage had ended in a divorce more bitter than the first. His company was facing federal investigation for fraud he'd inherited but failed to correct. His younger brother Devon was running everything now because Jamie couldn't be trusted with decisions that mattered. He drank to forget and couldn't. He went to therapy and got no relief. He hired a private investigator to learn about Sienna and felt sicker reading the reports about a daughter who was brilliant and strong and needed nothing from him. His therapist kept asking, "What do you regret most?" Jamie always gave the same answer. "Leaving that hospital room, calling her disgusting for bringing my daughter into the world." "Have you tried to contact them?" "No." "Why not?" Because he was a coward. Because 10 years of silence couldn't be erased with an apology. Because he'd told her not to contact him, and now the door was locked from both sides. But seeing that magazine, seeing Frida and Sienna looking so complete without him, something broke inside Jamie Boland. For the first time in 10 years, he wanted to try. Not for forgiveness, because that seemed impossible. Just for acknowledgement, just to say he was sorry and knew he didn't deserve anything in return. He picked up his phone and searched for Maison Noir's contact information, his finger hovering over the call button. Then he remembered the note he'd written. "Don't contact me about the child." He'd burned that bridge himself. Why would she ever let him near their daughter now? Why would she risk their perfect life by letting him contaminate it with his regret? He put the phone down and poured another drink instead, the only reliable company he had left. Chapter 8. The walls close in on him. Karma doesn't rush. It waits patiently until you have something to lose. Then it takes everything systematically. 13 years after abandoning Frida in that delivery room, Jamie Boland's life was unraveling in slow motion like a car crash viewed frame by frame. His perfect existence, built on inherited wealth and the ruthless business practices his father had taught him to see as normal, was collapsing piece by piece under scrutiny it couldn't withstand. The federal investigation into Boland Industries revealed systematic fraud going back decades. Tax evasion through shell companies in the Caymans, money laundering disguised as international investments, unethical dealings with foreign entities that violated sanctions. None of it was Jamie's personal doing, all of it happened under his father's leadership, but Jamie had continued the practices without question because that's what sons of billionaires did. Now the consequences were his alone to bear. His lawyers warned him with increasingly desperate urgency. This could mean prison time if we can't negotiate a settlement. The evidence is damning. The settlement would cost him hundreds of millions he no longer had. Carolyn's divorce had already taken half his wealth through a prenup that had loopholes her lawyers exploited brilliantly. She'd left him for a tech billionaire 20 years younger, taking Jamie's money and dignity with her. The tabloids ran photos of her at yacht parties, while Jamie drank alone in his apartment. His younger brother Devon, who'd always lived in Jamie's shadow and resented every second, now ran the company. The board had voted Jamie out as CEO, giving him a meaningless advisory role that everyone knew was charity. Devon was better at the job anyway, more ethical, more strategic, everything Jamie should have been if he hadn't been too busy living off his family's name like it was an achievement. Jamie started drinking seriously, not the social drinking of business dinners, but the kind of drinking that started at breakfast to stop his hands from shaking, bottles of scotch that didn't last the week, morning drinks before pointless meetings where his opinion no longer mattered. He showed up late, slurred his words, made his secretary cry with criticism he didn't mean but couldn't stop saying. Devon finally confronted him in the office that used to be Jamie's corner kingdom. "You're destroying yourself and embarrassing the family name. This has to stop. I already destroyed myself 13 years ago. This is just the aftermath becoming visible. Get help. Go to rehab. Do something before you drink yourself to death." But Jamie didn't want help. He wanted to disappear into the numbness that alcohol provided like mercy. Because when he was sober, all he could think about was the Architectural Digest magazine that still sat on his desk, pages worn from obsessive reading, Frida's face staring at him with the kind of success he'd never earned. He'd read the article so many times he'd damaged the pages, memorized every detail of her life like studying enemy territory. She'd lived in a homeless shelter while he was spending thousands on bottles of wine at charity galas. She'd worked 3 jobs to feed their daughter while he was marrying Carolyn in the Hamptons, the wedding covered by society pages like it mattered, and she'd won anyway, built an empire anyway, became someone anyway, despite him, without him, proving he'd never been necessary. His therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Chen, who probably deserved a better client, asked during one session, "Have you considered trying to contact your daughter? You talk about her constantly, but you've never tried to meet her." Jamie's hands shook badly enough to spill his coffee. "She doesn't know I exist. Frida's made sure of that. But she exists. Don't you want to meet her?" "I don't deserve to meet her. I gave up that right when I walked out of that hospital." "That's not for you to decide. It's for Frida and Sienna to decide if they want contact." The thought terrified him more than the federal investigation. What would he even say? How do you apologize for 13 years of absence? How do you explain to a child that you abandoned her because you found her mother's labor disgusting? How do you walk back calling someone you supposedly love disgusting for bringing life into the world? He started following Maison Noire on social media like a stalker, watching every video of Frida giving speeches at business conferences where she was introduced as a visionary. He studied photos of Sienna, trying to see himself in her features beyond the green eyes. She had his eyes, but none of his weakness, none of his cowardice. She had Frida's strength and something else entirely her own, something neither parent had given her because she'd forged it herself. One night, drunk and desperate in ways that made terrible decisions seem reasonable, he typed an email to Maison Noire's general contact address, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. "Frida, I know I have no right to contact you after 13 years of silence. I know I destroyed any chance of forgiveness when I walked out of that hospital room and called you disgusting for bringing our daughter into the world. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. I was cruel and cowardly, and I abandoned you when you needed me most. I would do anything to take it back. Please, just let me apologize in person. Let me meet Sienna once. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. Just acknowledgement that I'm sorry. Jamie." His finger hovered over the send button for 10 minutes while he reread it obsessively, changing words, deleting sentences, adding desperate pleas. Then he deleted the entire email because she'd blocked his personal email years ago anyway. The message would just go to some assistant who'd delete it unread, never knowing it represented the first honest thing he'd written in years. Devon found him passed out at his desk the next morning, empty bottle beside him like a monument to failure. "This has to stop. You're scaring people. The board is talking about cutting you off completely if you don't get help." "I scared away the only people who mattered," Jamie muttered through his hangover. "Everyone else can handle being scared. Get help or I'm cutting you off completely. No more office, no more salary, no more family connection to trade on. I mean it." Jamie looked at his younger brother, the successful one, the one who actually deserved their father's legacy. "You should have been Dad's favorite. You actually earned it through work instead of just existing." Devon's expression softened slightly. "This isn't about Dad or favorites. This is about you destroying yourself because you can't forgive yourself for something that happened 13 years ago." How do I forgive myself for that? How do you forgive abandoning your child? I don't know. But drinking yourself to death isn't the answer. It's just a slower form of the same cowardice. Jamie agreed to rehab to appease Devon and stop the lectures. 28 days at a facility in Connecticut where wealthy people went to hide their addictions from tabloids. Group therapy with other rich people whose lives had imploded. Meditation sessions and green juice and conversations about higher powers and making amends that felt meaningless. The counselor asked everyone to write letters to people they'd hurt as part of the recovery process. Jamie wrote to Frida, 17 pages of everything he'd wanted to say for 13 years, apologies and regrets and desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable. How he thought about her constantly, how he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness but desperately wanted it anyway. How sorry he was for every choice he'd made that night. The counselor read it and shook his head with disappointment. This letter is about you feeling better, not about her healing. It's selfish apology dressed up as amends. That's not recovery. That's just more selfishness with different words. Then what do I write? Maybe nothing. Maybe some debts can't be paid with words. Maybe the best thing you can do is leave them alone and let them be happy without you contaminating their lives with your guilt. Jamie completed rehab, stayed sober for the required time, started therapy with someone who specialized in rich people's problems. But the emptiness remained like a cavity in his chest that nothing could fill. He was 45 years old, with nothing that mattered. Money he'd inherited and mostly lost. A company he'd been removed from. 2 failed marriages where women had left him for better options, and a daughter who didn't know his name. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A business associate, someone who didn't know about Jamie and Frida's history because some connections ran deeper than professional networks, forwarded him an invitation to a Christmas gala. Maison Noire was celebrating 15 years since Sienna's birth with a massive event at the Plaza Hotel. The biggest names in business and entertainment would attend. It was the social event of the season that everyone wanted access to. Jamie stared at the invitation for hours, the embossed letters blurring as tears filled his eyes. This was his chance, not to apologize because apologies were worthless after 13 years of silence, but to see them in person, to witness what he'd lost, to understand the full weight of his mistake with his own eyes instead of through magazine photos. His therapist warned him with unusual directness. This is a terrible idea. You're not ready for this confrontation. They don't want you there. I'll never be ready. There's no amount of therapy that makes you ready to face the child you abandoned. Then don't go. Let them have their celebration without your guilt polluting it. That's the kindest thing you can do. But Jamie couldn't stay away. He RSVP'd yes under his full name, James Boland. If Frida saw the guest list, she'd know. If she wanted to uninvite him, she could. But he had to try, had to see them once, even if it destroyed him completely. The RSVP was accepted without comment. Either Frida didn't check the list, or she didn't care enough to exclude him. Jamie didn't know which possibility hurt more. He bought a new tuxedo because his old one no longer fit his diminished frame. He practiced what he might say if he got the chance. He wrote and deleted 100 different versions of "I'm sorry" that all sounded equally inadequate. The night before the gala, he stood in his empty apartment holding the invitation and whispered to no one, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know seeing me will hurt them, but I have to try. I have to let them know that walking away was the biggest mistake of my life, even if knowing that changes nothing for them." He went to bed sober for the first time in months, knowing tomorrow would either begin his redemption or complete his destruction. Either way, he couldn't hide anymore. Chapter 9. The Encounter. Some moments don't need words. They need witnesses to ensure truth is remembered. The Plaza Hotel glittered with winter magic on the night of Maison Noire's gala, celebrating 15 years since Sienna's birth. Ice sculptures lined the entrance, catching light from 1,000 sources. A red carpet stretched from street to lobby, where photographers captured arriving guests in evening wear that cost more than most people's cars. Inside the grand ballroom, 700 people mingled under crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow light across marble floors, polished to mirror shine. Frida stood at the top of the grand staircase wearing a custom gown she'd designed specifically for this night, with meaning woven into every thread. Midnight blue silk embroidered with golden thread that told her story in symbols only she could read. A tiny shelter building on the hem where it all began, Ruth's initials near her heart, Sienna's birth date woven into the train in numbers that looked like decoration but meant everything. Beside her, Sienna wore a matching gown in slightly lighter shade that complemented rather than competed. At 15, she was stunning in ways that transcended physical beauty, poised beyond her years with quiet power that didn't need announcement. Strong in ways Jamie would never understand, because he wasn't there to watch her become herself through struggle and love. They descended the stairs together as the crowd turned to watch with the kind of attention usually reserved for royalty. Mother and daughter, an empire built from love and determination and refusal to stay broken, everything Jamie had thrown away standing before 700 witnesses who understood success earned rather than inherited. Frida's closest friends sat at the head table, the women from the shelter who'd helped raise Sienna, now all successful in their own right thanks to Frida's mentorship that extended beyond business into life transformation. Her employees wearing Maison Noire designs with pride because they knew their boss valued them as humans rather than resources to exploit. Business partners who'd believed in her when believing was risky. The evening began with dinner, 7 courses of perfection that Frida barely tasted because she was too busy watching Sienna interact with guests, confident and articulate, making connections that would serve her well in years to come. Her daughter was everything she'd hoped she'd become, proof that single mothers could raise powerful children without fathers. Then the doors opened. Frida was mid-conversation with a senator about labor policy when she felt the room's energy shift like atmospheric pressure before a storm. People stopped talking. Heads turned toward the entrance in that universal way humans acknowledge disruption. Whispers spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. A man stood in the doorway looking lost and broken, late 40s but looking older, worn down by choices and consequences. Grey at the temples, too thin, like he'd lost weight rapidly through stress or illness, wearing a tuxedo that no longer fit properly, hanging off his diminished frame like borrowed clothes, and crying, not subtle tears that could be ignored, full body shaking sobs that echoed in the suddenly quiet ballroom. Frida's breath caught despite years of preparation for this moment. Even after 13 years of building a life without him, she recognized Jamie Boland immediately. The man who'd walked out of that delivery room looked nothing like the broken figure in the doorway, but his eyes were the same. Green like Sienna's, filled with regret that came too late to matter. Security moved to intercept him automatically, trained to remove disruptions efficiently. But Frida raised one hand and they stopped immediately, following her signals like soldiers awaiting orders. The entire ballroom watched as Jamie stumbled forward, his eyes locked on Frida with desperate intensity that made her feel nothing. No anger, no pain, just exhausted indifference toward someone who'd become irrelevant through his own choices. He crossed the ballroom floor like a man walking to his execution, every step weighted with regret that was 13 years too late to mean anything. When he reached her table, he tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the pressure of everything he wanted to say. "Frida, I came to..." She didn't let him finish, her voice calm and almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. "You came to what, Jamie? Apologize? Ask forgiveness? Meet the daughter you abandoned because I was too disgusting to stand during labor?" The entire room was watching now. 700 witnesses to this moment, photographers who'd been hired to capture celebration instead capturing confrontation that would be discussed for years. Jamie nodded, unable to form words, tears making tracks down his face that had aged badly. Then Sienna appeared beside her mother, crossing the floor from where she'd been talking to young entrepreneurs. She'd felt the shift and come to stand where she belonged, beside Frida, always beside Frida. She looked at Jamie with polite curiosity that held no recognition, no connection, nothing but the mild interest someone might show a stranger making a scene. Jamie stared at her, devastated by the beauty and strength he saw in features that were partly his but entirely hers. Everything he'd lost, everything he'd never known. His daughter, looking at him like he was nothing because to her, he was nothing. She had no father, just a mother who'd been enough. "Sienna," he whispered, her name breaking on his tongue. "You're so beautiful. You look just like... I'm your..." Sienna glanced at her mother with a look that communicated volumes, then back at Jamie with those green eyes that were his only contribution to her existence. "Thank you. I'm sorry. Have we met?" The question destroyed him more completely than any insult could have. She didn't know him, didn't recognize him even though his face had been in magazines. Frida had successfully erased him from their daughter's life so completely that he was just another stranger at a gala. Frida placed her hand on Sienna's shoulder, a gesture of both protection and possession that needed no translation. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom to every witness. "You're not welcome here, Jamie. Not as my guest, not as her father, not as anything. You were invited by someone who didn't know our history. Now you do. Leave." Jamie broke down completely, the sob that came from him animalistic and raw. "Please," he begged without dignity or restraint. "I lost everything. I just need to explain. I just need you to know I'm sorry." Frida cut him off, her voice sharp now like a blade finding flesh. "You lost everything. No, Jamie, you had everything and threw it away. There's a profound difference. I lost everything when you walked out of that hospital. I lost my home. I lived in a shelter with rats and desperation. I worked 3 jobs while our daughter slept in a donated crib that other babies had used before her. I lost my dignity 100 times, rebuilding it stronger each time. Don't talk to me about loss like you understand it." Security was moving in now, flanking Jamie on both sides with professional efficiency. He tried one more time, his voice desperate and broken. "Please, Frida. One chance. Just one conversation to explain. I'll do anything." "You had your chance 13 years ago. You called it labor and walked away. You called me disgusting for bringing life into the world. There are no second chances for cowards who abandon their children." As security took his arms to escort him out, Jamie turned and screamed loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll change. I'll be better. I can be a father. Give me one chance." Frida's response stopped everyone cold, her voice like steel forged in fire that doesn't bend. "I gave you a chance 13 years ago in that delivery room. You chose to leave. I chose to stay and build everything you see around you. That's the difference between us. You run when things get hard. I build empires from the ashes of what you destroyed. There's no redemption for that, no coming back. You're not my villain, Jamie. You're just irrelevant." Security escorted a sobbing Jamie Boland through the ballroom while 700 people watched in silence. As he passed, some looked at him with pity, others with contempt, most with nothing at all, because they understood he didn't deserve their emotional energy. He reached the doors and turned one last time, desperate for any acknowledgement that he mattered. But Frida and Sienna had already turned away, already moved on, already forgotten him. They stood together on the stage, illuminated by lights, looking like queens who'd built their kingdom and didn't need kings. The doors closed. Jamie was gone. For exactly 3 seconds, the ballroom remained silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire room erupted in applause that wasn't polite or obligatory, but genuine appreciation for witnessing strength that refused to bend. Sienna leaned into her mother, whispering, "Was that really him?" "Yes." "He looked sad and broken." That's what happens when you throw away everything that matters and finally realize what you lost. "Do you feel bad for him?" Frida considered the question honestly. "No, baby, I feel nothing. And that's better than he deserves, because feeling nothing means he no longer has power over me." The gala continued. Dinner was served while people discussed what they'd witnessed. Champagne flowed. But everyone knew they'd seen something significant. Not just confrontation, but a statement about what happens when weak men abandon strong women, and those women refuse to stay broken. Outside the plaza, Jamie sat in his car, unable to drive, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. He could hear the celebration through the walls, music and laughter and joy that didn't include him and never would. He'd thought seeing them might bring closure or redemption, or at least acknowledgement of his regret. Instead, it brought crushing clarity. He'd spent 13 years thinking Frida would be broken without him, that she'd struggle and eventually need him and maybe forgive him. Instead, his abandonment had been her launching point, the moment that transformed her from someone who loved him into someone who didn't need anyone. And Sienna. His daughter looked at him with the same polite indifference people reserve for strangers who mean nothing and never will. His phone rang. Devon. "Where are you?" "Outside the plaza. I went to her event." "Jamie, what were you thinking?" "I needed to see them, needed to try. And I finally understand that some doors close permanently, not because people are cruel, but because I don't deserve to walk through them. I destroyed that chance myself. Come home. We'll talk." But Jamie didn't go home. He sat in his car outside the plaza until the celebration ended, watching guests leave with joy he'd never feel again. He'd come here hoping for redemption, and found only proof that he was exactly as irrelevant as Frida had said. Some mistakes couldn't be fixed. Some consequences lasted forever, and Jamie Boland would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he'd thrown away, while they lived every day grateful for what they'd become. Chapter 10. The speech that echoed forever. The greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's becoming so phenomenal they destroy themselves watching you shine. After Jamie was removed from the ballroom, Frida stood backstage for a moment, collecting herself. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. She'd imagined this moment for 13 years, and now that it had happened, she felt only relief. The last chain connecting her to that painful past had finally broken. "Are you okay, Mama?" Sienna asked, squeezing her hand. "I'm perfect, baby. More perfect than I've been in years." They returned to the ballroom together, where guests had resumed their celebration, but energy lingered. Everyone wanted to hear what Frida would say after that confrontation, how she'd address what they'd witnessed. The MC took the microphone, a television personality who'd volunteered to host. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman we're here to celebrate, the architect of Maison Noire, the woman who redefined what luxury means in modern business, Frida Bussey." The applause was thunderous. Frida crossed the stage with Sienna beside her and stood at the podium. 700 faces looked up expectantly. She looked back at them and began speaking, her voice steady and powerful. 15 years ago tonight, I gave birth to my daughter alone in a hospital room. Her father had just told me he couldn't stand me anymore. Couldn't stand the sounds I made during labor, the way I looked while bringing life into this world. He walked out as I was being wheeled to delivery. The room was silent, every eye on her. She continued. That man who just left crying was Jamie Boland. He left us with nothing, not even dignity. I spent my first year as a mother in a homeless shelter, working 3 jobs, studying business books while my baby slept in a donated crib. People laughed at me, told me I'd never make it, told me I should have been smarter, shouldn't have loved a man who didn't love me back. They treated my poverty like a moral failing instead of temporary circumstances I was fighting to change. Her voice grew stronger. But I learned something in that shelter that the wealthy are never taught. Rock bottom is the strongest foundation you can build on. When you have nothing to lose, and that makes you dangerous. Beautifully, powerfully dangerous in ways that threaten every system built on keeping people down. Heads nodded throughout the crowd, people leaning forward to catch every word. I built Maison Noire with $8,000 I saved from tips and a friend named Ruth, who believed in me when belief was a radical act. I built it in a country that told me black women don't lead billion-dollar companies. I built it after being sexually harassed by buyers who thought desperation and availability were the same thing. I built it while raising a daughter who is more remarkable than any product I could ever design. She looked at Sienna in the front row. Tonight, we celebrate 15 years of defying expectations, but we're not just celebrating me. We're celebrating every woman in this room who was told she wasn't enough, every mother who raised children alone while the world judged her, every person who turned pain into purpose and refused to let circumstances define their destiny. Jamie Boland came here tonight seeking forgiveness, maybe redemption. But here's what I learned through years of building. Forgiveness is for people who earn it through changed behavior, not desperate apologies. Redemption isn't something you beg for at a gala. It's something you build quietly without an audience through sustained action that demonstrates genuine transformation. Her voice carried across the ballroom. He doesn't get my forgiveness tonight. He doesn't get to know Sienna or claim any part of what we've built. What he gets is this: the knowledge that he had something priceless and traded it for nothing. That's not revenge. That's just natural consequences playing out over time. She paused, letting that sink in. To everyone here tonight, you are witnessing what happens when a woman refuses to stay broken. When she takes her daughter's hand and walks through fire until the fire itself bows down. This empire isn't built on anger or bitterness. It's built on love. Love for myself, for Sienna, for every woman who society tried to erase but who refused to disappear. Jamie Boland didn't deserve our forgiveness tonight, but honestly, we don't need to give it to him. His punishment is living every day knowing what he lost while we live every day grateful for what we became. And that gratitude, that joy in what we've built without him, that's the ultimate victory. She raised her champagne glass. To Maison Noire. To strength that doesn't need validation. To single mothers everywhere building empires with their children as their strength. To never settling for people who can't stand the sound of life being born. The room exploded in applause that wasn't just polite, but genuine, visceral appreciation for truth spoken without apology. People stood, champagne glasses raised. Women were crying, men nodding, everyone understanding they'd witnessed something that transcended business success. Sienna joined her mother on stage. They held hands as flashbulbs popped, capturing the moment for magazines that would run the story for weeks. Mother and daughter, empire builders, living proof that abandonment could be a beginning rather than an ending. The gala continued for hours. Frida and Sienna danced together as the orchestra played, surrounded by women who'd helped raise Sienna, all of them successful now, all proof that transformation was possible. Business partners approached with congratulations. Celebrities requested photos. But the most meaningful moment came from a young woman who worked in shipping. Mrs. Bussey, I just wanted to say thank you. I was homeless 6 months ago. You hired me when nobody else would. Tonight, watching you tell your story, I realized I can rebuild too. Thank you for showing me it's possible. Frida hugged her. You're already rebuilding. Keep going. One day you'll come back and tell someone else it's possible. At midnight, as guests began leaving, Sienna and Frida stood on the plaza's steps, watching snow start to fall. Perfect timing, like the universe was celebrating with them. Mama, do you think he'll try to contact us again? No, baby. Tonight he finally understood that we don't need him. Never did. Never will. And that understanding is more final than any door we could close. Do you hate him? Frida thought carefully about the question. No. Hate requires caring enough to feel something. I've moved so far beyond him that he doesn't even register as someone worth hating. He's just a man who made a choice 13 years ago. That choice built all of this. She gestured to the beautiful hotel, the celebration they'd just had, the life they'd created. I should probably thank him. His cruelty became my fuel. They took a car service back to their brownstone. Sienna fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted from the evening. Frida carried her inside and tucked her into bed, marveling that her baby was now 15 and too big to carry, but she'd done it anyway. In her own room, Frida carefully hung up the midnight blue dress that told her story in golden thread. She looked at herself in the mirror. 43 years old, successful beyond her wildest dreams. A daughter who was her greatest creation. A company that changed lives. A life built entirely on her own terms, without compromise. Jamie's note from 13 years ago still hung framed in her office. This is generous. Don't contact me about the child. Tomorrow, Frida decided, she would take it down. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer served any purpose. That note had driven her for 13 years, proving him wrong with every success, using his rejection as motivation. But she didn't need that motivation anymore. She'd become so phenomenal that his rejection was just a footnote, an origin story that no longer defined her present. She texted her assistant, "Remove the framed note from my office tomorrow. It's time." The response came quickly. "Already done. Proud of you." Frida set down her phone and climbed into bed. Somewhere across the city, Jamie Boland was probably still awake, drowning in regret. Let him drown. Let him spend the rest of his life knowing what he'd lost. Let him see her success in magazines and interviews and understand that everything she'd built despite him, not because of him. That was the greatest revenge. Not his suffering, which she didn't care enough to enjoy, but her complete indifference to his existence, the fact that she'd moved so far beyond him that he was irrelevant. Frida fell asleep smiling, dreaming of the future she would build with Sienna. New product lines, more stores, a foundation helping women escape poverty through job training and microloans, a legacy that would outlast them both. Jamie Boland wasn't part of any of those dreams. He never would be again, and that was exactly what he'd earned.